If I may, just to introduce Andrew before he starts off, we're so pleased to have Andrew join us this evening. He is not only the State Government Affairs Manager for Electrify America, which he's going to tell us what that is, but he's also in the past worked with the state of Oregon on transportation and electric vehicle programs. He's got quite an extensive resume here that was in the announcement that went out, so I'm not going to read everything about that. Just to say that we are delighted to have you come from far away. Where, Andrew? Washington, D.C.?
We're based in Reston, Virginia.
There you are. Very good. Well, thank you for being here, and take it away, Andrew.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Charlie. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks everybody for having me. Heard a lot about this group as my parents disclosed. Mary and Jim are my parents. But I am State Government Affairs Manager for Electrify America, which is the largest network of DC fast charging stations for electric vehicles in the country. I'm also an EV driver. I've been driving electric since 2016. It was the first car that I bought myself was a Chevy Volt with a V, the plug-in hybrid. And then I moved over to a Nissan Leaf. I have a Gen 1 Leaf, and I drive that vehicle from where I live all the way out to Lewis, Delaware, several times a year. So I know what it's like to look for charging options, and I know how important it is to keep building out the EV charging network into the future. So anyway, I'm going to talk about a few things tonight. First, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Electrify America, who we are, and the work that we're doing. Next up, I wanted to talk about the federal infrastructure bill that passed last fall and all the really exciting work that's happening around that. That really is a once in a generation opportunity to build out EV charging stations, and want everybody to kind of know what's happening with that. And then lastly, I want to talk about supportive policy. The actions of governments in creating policy that can help to sustain this shift and support the transition to EVs, it's critically important. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that we look at as being most important in terms of what supports building out this network. So jumping right in, we are the largest open DC fast charging network in the country. And so we say open because we are a non-proprietary network. We support the open standards that are compatible with all the vehicles. And so that's in contrast to a company like Tesla, which has a very extensive network, but it's a closed proprietary network at this point in time. It's not compatible with other vehicles. And so we want to be the charging network for everybody, supporting those open standards. We have more than 3,100 chargers at more than 730 locations nationally. You can see where we are already, but we continue to build out and add additional routes, as we move forward in time. And so full disclosure, we don't have a huge footprint in Delaware, and just kind of wanted to say that right off the bat. The way that we have really focused on building up the network is to cover the major interstates first, and then identify sort of key metro markets and build up in those metro markets. But as you can see from the map, there are some gaps, and we're committed to continuing to build out and fill those gaps. But in Delaware right now, we have a location in Newcastle with 6 of these chargers. But at this point in time, we don't have a more extensive footprint than that. So just wanted to get that sort of out of the way up front in terms of where we are to date. But this is what one of our charging stations looks like. These are large format charging stations, and importantly, these are very, very high power charging stations. Something that you learn quickly when you start to drive an electric vehicle is that there's all different kinds of ways to charge your electric vehicle. All the way from a level 1 charge in a normal electrical outlet that you might have. Then there's a level 2 charge, which charges your vehicle much faster, but still over the course of several hours. That could be either a home or a public charge. And then you have DC fast charging. And DC fast charging is the fastest rate of charging for electric vehicles. This is charging on the order of minutes rather than on the order of hours. And this fills a critical role in the EV charging ecosystem. If you're driving on a long trip, if you're going, driving from DC to Boston or something like that, and you need to charge multiple times during your trip, DC fast charging is absolutely critically necessary to making sure that this vehicle can serve your transportation needs. because frankly, it's just not realistic that if you're driving along, you can stop and wait for 3 or 4 hours to charge your vehicle before you hit the road again. So our stations support the fastest charging speeds that are commercially available, up to 350 kilowatts. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But really, it's focused on serving interstate travel, focused on serving the needs of folks who have no ability to charge at home or where they work. This is getting in and out on comparable times to a gas station, getting folks back on the road as quickly as possible so that this can be as convenient as possible for them. So kilowatts are a very unfamiliar metric. You know, everybody's used to miles per gallon, and you know that you spend 5 to 10 minutes at a gas station fueling up. But kilowatts, basically, they correspond to the power of the charger and how fast you can get back on the road once you've stopped to charge. And so 5 or 6 years ago, everybody was down at about 50 kilowatts of charging power, which translates to 3 miles of vehicle range restored for every minute that you're plugged in. So just think about that in terms of your customer experience. You stop somewhere for half an hour, you have about 90 miles of range restored to your vehicle that you can use to get to your next destination. And that might work in a pinch. It might work if it's something you don't do that often. But if you were driving again on one of these really long distance road trips, or if you didn't have any access to home charging and you had to take time out of your week every week to find a public charger, this could potentially be difficult over time. It could be potentially inconvenient. So then you get up to 150 kilowatts, where you're looking at 9 miles of range per minute. Now you can imagine stopping for 20 minutes and having 180 miles of range restored to your vehicle. That's getting better for a once a week trip to the grocery store or something when you charge up your vehicle before you go on your way. And then at 350 kilowatts, you're talking about 20 miles of range restored to your vehicle for every minute you're plugged in. Now you can stop for 10 minutes along the highway and have 200 miles of range restored to your vehicle to get to your next destination. And so this is much more approaching gasoline refueling speeds. And at all of our what we call corridor charging stations, the stations we build along major highways and interstates, we support those 350 kilowatt charging speeds. Now it's true, not all the vehicles at this point in time can actually accept that level of power, but of course we're compatible with the lower rates of charging as well. And the auto manufacturers are very quickly moving towards those fastest charging speeds. So that's really at the heart of it, what we're building out. We're building out a network of chargers that provide a refueling speed that approaches the convenience of gasoline while also being electric. And we really hope that this nationwide network of these chargers is going to form the basis for people to view an electric vehicle as a viable alternative that they can use to serve all of their transportation needs, whether they're driving around town or whether they're driving on a long road trip around the country. So right now we're in the middle of what we call our cycle 3 investments. We're investing over 4 investment cycles. And in cycle 3, we're starting to fill in some of those gaps you might have seen in the previous map. So gaps in the upper Midwest, gaps in the Southeast, gaps in the Northeast, and also adding new metro areas or coming back to metro areas, including the greater Philadelphia metro area, which includes the Wilmington, Delaware area. So we may have additional investments in the state that are coming up over the next couple of years here. In addition to the work that we do to actually build out the infrastructure, we have a couple of other sort of initiatives. We have education awareness campaigns. We have workforce development activities. And so we do offer sponsorship funds. We support membership and sponsorship activities that help to raise awareness about electric vehicles. And education outreach is so important. We have the metrics from the activities that we've supported that really show how little awareness there is of this technology still at this point in time. We've come a long way over the past 10, 11 years since these vehicles first came to market. But still we see in our surveys that 65% of Americans say that not only have they never driven, but they don't know anybody who has driven an all-electric vehicle. And nearly 4 in 5 Americans think that finding an EV charging station is at least moderately difficult, even as we've reached the point where we've built out tens of thousands of these across the country and really have many of them in very convenient locations. And then lastly, the actual exposure angle is very important. 92% of the ride and drive attendees and the ride and drives that we sponsor have a better impression of the technology actually after they've had the opportunity to experience it. So these activities are really important for raising awareness of the technology and building out the market. Workforce development is increasingly a focus of what we do, making sure that we're not just installing the charging stations, but actually building capacity, offering economic opportunities for particularly folks from low income and disadvantaged communities to be part of this movement, to be folks who can actually get a job in the industry moving forwards. And so we funded programs through colleges, through technical institutes like the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, to provide folks with an education on how to operate and maintain these technologies, how to build these software systems on the back end that support these technologies. And so we have this extensive program that we continue to build out to provide STEM education, to provide the education awareness work, and make sure that this is broader than just the investment in the infrastructure, and really that there are career opportunities for folks in the future to be part of the green jobs. So in addition to the map that I showed earlier, we made a very exciting announcement last summer called the Boost announcement. And through our Boost plan, we're going to build out significantly above and beyond what we've done in the past, out to a total of 10,000 individual chargers by the end of 2025. And you can see in this notional map here in the bottom right where we want to be. Significantly expanding our coverage across all of North America, including a coast-to-coast route across Canada, and increasing density in key markets, and just continuing to build this out into the future. We don't want it to be harder to find a high-speed EV charging station than it is right now to find a gas station. We want it to be just as convenient to drive electric as it is to drive a gasoline vehicle, with, of course, all the energy and climate benefits that come along with that. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the federal infrastructure investments. This is really exciting. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was passed in the fall calls for $7.5 billion in new spending on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And this is going to be a big piece of the puzzle in how we fill the gaps that exist in the current network, and continue to provide drivers with the confidence that they can go anywhere they want to go driving an electric vehicle. Out of the $7.5 billion, $6.25 billion, most of the funds are actually dedicated to highway corridor charging. There's some dedicated to communities, sort of local charging, but most of this is on high-speed corridor charging. Really is sort of a parallel to what Eisenhower did with the interstates in the 1950s. We're electrifying the interstate highway system and then the major highways within the states to make sure that people can get where they want to go in an electric vehicle. The state of Delaware will receive $18 million approximately over 5 years under the formula funding program. This is going to be led through the state DOT, and the funds need to be dedicated to charging along designated alt fuels corridors until those are complete. The alt fuels corridors program has been run by the Federal Highway Administration for about 6 years now, but it's never had any funding tied to it. So states, including Delaware, have basically been making a wish list of where they would like to see charging in the future. And now we actually have the funding vehicle, $18 million to support that build out along Delaware's highway system. So this is going to happen over the next 5 years, and it's very exciting because it's an opportunity to fill some of the gaps that currently exist in the network. And so why are we focused on ultra-fast charging, and why do we think it's a good idea that as states consider this announcement and this opportunity, this $7.5 billion, that they also consider ultra-fast charging? Well, electric vehicle technology is changing rapidly year over year. The vehicles are getting much longer range. They're supporting much faster rates of charging. And so 1 year's model of electric vehicle versus the next year's it's not like comparing a 2018 Toyota Camry to a 2019 Toyota Camry. It's like comparing an iPhone to an iPhone 5 to an iPhone 10. That's just how quickly this is evolving. It's evolving on technical or technology timescales rather than on the sort of more incremental timescales that we're used to in some of these industries. So you can see back in 2016 on the left axis here, this is the average miles of range for a new EV. In 2016, the average new EV had about 84 miles of range. As of 2021, the average new EV has over 250 miles of range. And on the right axis, you can see that in 2016, the average EV only supported about 50 kilowatts of charging power. Again, that's restoring only about 3 miles of range for every minute that you're plugged in. But as of 2021, now the average new EV supports 150 kilowatts of charging power. So really the key takeaway here is that electric vehicle technology is getting much longer range and much faster charging power, with both of those factors tripling over the past 5 years. And average EV now is 3 times longer range and charges at 3 times faster charging rates than the average EV did in 2016. And that's really exciting because when we look at the consumer surveys, we look at what people are saying about EVs, they complain they don't go far enough, they take too long to charge, the charging stations aren't in the places where we need them. And so the technology is really now meeting all of those complaints, all of those demands. The technology is faster, the technology is much longer range for the vehicles themselves. And as long as we deploy charging stations around the country that meet those demands, consumers are going to see that this technology meets their needs and they're going to adopt it. They're going to start driving electric in the future. But the other thing that we really need to do is make sure that the technology is reliable. I'm an EV driver. I know there are lots of other EV drivers on this call. So everyone knows the experience of arriving at the EV charging station and not knowing whether or not the charger is going to work. And worse yet, arriving at the station and having the charger not work and having to find a backup. So technology failure or error continues to be one of the top concerns we see from customers. We saw in another even more recent JD Power study that having a charger not work when you arrive, it's the #1 concern of EV drivers. And so as we move into the future, we really need to recognize that ultra-fast and reliable charging is everything. And ensuring reliability is critically necessary to making sure that folks adopt this technology and have confidence in it and have good experiences to tell their friends and family that the technology works well and will work for them as well. I'm going to skip a few slides here just because it's I know we're a little bit pressed on time and started a little bit late. But just in terms of what the federal program guidance is requiring, the federal government is focused on at least a minimum of 150 kilowatt charging. So they're into those ultra fast charging speeds, recognizing that the vehicles are getting so much faster and that consumers really demand this experience. And won't adopt EVs if we're at slower charging rates. And there's wide support across the industry, all kinds of influential organizations that recognize that not just 150 kilowatts, but really 350 kilowatts of charging power, that 20 miles of range per minute, that comparable to gasoline refueling experience is going to be necessary to support this technology in the long term. So we hope that folks are going to continue to push towards those faster technologies. We think that that's what the consumers are going to demand into the future. And it's not only is building with the fastest rates of charging the most customer friendly in terms of providing the least sort of disbenefit relative to gasoline, but it's also actually turns out to be the most cost effective. Because even though the chargers are more expensive on a per unit basis, they have much higher throughput. When you charge vehicles more quickly, your vehicles don't need to stay at your charging station for as long. And so you avoid queuing, you avoid lines of people who are waiting to charge on long road trips. You can get people in and out and get them back on their way. And so Atlas Public Policy, which is one of the most well-regarded experts in the EV charging space, actually found that you save about 25% of the required investment by going with the fastest charging rates relative to the middle charging rates, because of that higher throughput, because you serve more vehicles and get them back on the road. And so you need fewer stations to serve a greater population of EV chargers. So last point on this before I pause for questions, but reliability is also critical. And the federal program guidance talking about reliability emphasized that reliability is absolutely necessary to build consumer confidence and make sure that people have, good experiences at these chargers and promote positive word of mouth, as well as just being able to get to their destination. And so the federal program guidance emphasized demonstrated experience or capability to not only install these chargers, but maintain them and operate them and make sure they're working for at least a 5-year in-service period, and in order to make sure that when people arrive at the station, it's working. Reliability also emphasized by a wide range of national organizations. Forth is probably the leading nonprofit in the country on electric vehicle policy, but then you also see others like the Rocky Mountain Institute and even folks like the National Electrical Manufacturers Association talking about the importance of maintenance and operations. It's not just about installing the charging equipment, it's about having a strategy for making sure that it stays working into the future. So just what do maintenance capabilities look like? What do operations capabilities look like? Well, for our part, we as a company have built out sort of a suite of capabilities that help us to make sure that we're maximizing reliability of our charging network. We don't just have a customer contact center, a 24/7 phone support or email support that you can call if you run into an issue at the station or need help sort of walking through the steps of starting a charge. But we actually operate a test laboratory where we get the vehicles from the manufacturers before they hit the dealership lots. And we put them through thousands of hours of interoperability testing, making sure that the vehicles and the charging stations are speaking the same language. And that there aren't any communications issues between the vehicles and the chargers that prevent a charge from starting. We also have a network operations center. It looks sort of like NASA mission control, and we have a team of engineers, diagnosticians who are monitoring the network 24/7, looking for any sort of remote notification that there are charging errors or problems with the network, so they can remotely diagnose and fix those errors and bring those charging stations back online. We also have a fleet of roaming test drivers who drive around from station to station, just making sure that everything is working, making sure that that we identify any errors with the charging stations before one of our customers shows up and encounters the error themselves. And then lastly, parts in stock. This might not have seemed like such a hot issue a couple of years ago, but now with all the issues with the supply chain and all these news headlines about container ships that are stuck or haven't unloaded, parts in stock is really becoming something that's critical. We maintain a domestic supply of all the parts to fix our chargers. We have the ability to roll trucks day or night to bring stations back online. And so making sure that you have those domestic repair capabilities, even if some of your parts are produced internationally, is critical to making sure that you minimize downtime on your network and you can bring your stations back online. So I know that was a whole lot on the first two topics, but I thought maybe I would pause here for questions and see if there are any thoughts from the group.
Andrew, there's lots of questions in the Q&A or the chat, I guess it is. Are you able to take a look at those and see if some of those are questions you might want to answer, or maybe some of the questions that people asked when we were doing introductions?
I've got a question.
Sure.
My first question is, of course, I was a little discouraged to hear that Delaware would be like 2 years out. And I'm just curious, what's involved in approaching a state or a county? Can you just walk us through how Electrify America goes about approaching a project like this, and who decides on the locations? How does that get sussed out too? Thank you for my question.
Sure. So we have on our website, electrifyamerica.com, there's a link that says Our Plan. And if you want to read about our plan and read through the entire decision-making process that resulted in the build-out strategy, that's all sort of outlined there. Basically, we want to be everywhere across the entire country, but unfortunately, we are funding constrained. We only have a certain amount to invest. And so from the beginning, what we really tried to do was to build out a national charging network by focusing on the major interstates around the country. And so one of those was I-95, and we built right through Delaware, through Newcastle and Wilmington. But in terms of how we've sort of moved down to lower traffic routes, there is always more demand for building out additional charging than there actually is funding to support that. That, I think, is why this federal infrastructure investment opportunity is so exciting. Delaware now has $18 million coming to the state to support that build out. And actually that $18 million, there's a cost share. That only supports 80% of the funds. So there's actually, it's going to leverage additional investment from the private sector to build that out further. We do have a public process. So every time we do an investment cycle, we have a website where we accept submissions from nonprofits, from the general public. Anybody can nominate a specific site. They can nominate a general market for investment. And we read and respond to every single one of those submissions. Our next submissions cycle will begin in January of next year. And at that point in time, of course, we'll be making new decisions about where to invest. But I said it up front because a lot of people in the company wish we had more in Delaware. It's pretty close by to where we are, and a lot of people drive through the state. And of course, I would love to see more of those investments as well. But it always comes down to sort of a prioritization based on traffic volumes and where we see EV adoption. And we never have quite as much funding for the network that we want to build out.
If I could just again reiterate that in Delaware, our two big economic drivers are agriculture and tourism, and we have millions of people come to visit us in Delaware in the summertime. And the last time I checked, I think we have maybe 16, maybe Charlie can confirm that, 16 non-Tesla chargers in the whole state. So, I wish things could happen faster for us. 2 years seems like an awfully long time. Plus, we have a commitment to reducing carbon by a certain date, and I'm wondering how we're going to meet those goals if we can't, pardon the expression, step on the gas and get these chargers up and running soon. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I completely hear you. And again, the federal infrastructure investment, those funds will be, that program will stand up as soon as November of this year. So I think there's a lot of work on the horizon. The $7.5 billion from the federal government is really going to kick this into overdrive. And Delaware has a specific allocation under that program. So there's funding for the state to do this important work. And it's already passed. DOT is putting together the program guidelines right now, and the state of Delaware is coming up with its plan on how to spend those funds.
Yeah, it's not 16 level 3. It's more like 6 or 7 level 3 in the entire state, not counting the setup you have up in Newcastle County.
Thanks, Dean. Maybe we could ask some people in the chat had to ask a number of great questions. Beth Chages, you had a couple of good ones. Can you unmute and ask your questions?
Well, I kind of think Judy just covered one of them, which was a little bit more about the process of deciding exact location. I mean, I get the general outline that you want to stay along major interstate corridors. But once you've determined that you're starting to build in this section or whatever, are you looking for kind of like state properties, like rest stops, or are you looking for Wawas and that kind of thing? And how do you determine which are the best places? So that maybe is just a little more detail on what Judy said. And then I wondered how paying for the charge works with your network. You know, do you need to register in advance and get a little card? Do you need an app? Do you need, you know, just wave your credit card at the machine, or what?
That's a great question. So, first, in terms of how we locate charging stations, we try to co-locate with retail amenities. If you build a gas station, usually you have a convenience store and you have some restrooms and things like that. But in the EV charging business, it's not really still the model to build that whole type of facility. So it's very important for us that our customers have somewhere to use a restroom, get a cup of coffee, all the things that you might need to do on a long road trip. And so we do try to co-locate with those types of facilities. We've built at Wawa. Our biggest category of folks that we build with is grocery stores, particularly in metro markets, so that folks can build charging into their weekly routine when they go grocery shopping. We also have partnerships with big box retailers, and we also do installations with mom and pops. So there's a wide range of properties, but it's all focused on having something to do, having a good experience for the customer while they're waiting for their vehicle to charge. And I'm glad you asked the question about how payment is handled on the network, because actually when we started out, we did a lot of sort of surveys and focus groups and testing. And that was one of the top complaints we heard was, when I arrive at a new charging station, I don't have any idea how to use it. I have to figure out if I download an app or if I had to mail away for a card, and I didn't do that. And so we actually try to support all of the different payment options. We have a credit card reader on every single station that supports chip, tap, and swipe. We have a 1-800 number you can call. You can provide your credit card information over the phone if you don't have another way to do that. We do have a phone app. We support Google Pay. We support Apple Pay. So we try to have an all of the above type of attitude towards payment methods.
Eric, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was wondering about one issue that comes up from time to time. People pulling trailers. If you pull into a charging station and you have to go in nose first, the trailer's sticking way out and potentially blocking other people, or you might end up blocking more than one stall. And this is a problem that comes up in the Tesla world as well. Pull-through stations generally work better, and I was wondering if you would given some thought to that.
Yeah, it's something that's come up more and more recently. And so it is something that we're looking at. A lot of our site design is building charging stations in existing parking lots. And often the existing retail facilities where we put chargers are not really configured for pull-through stations. So just normal parking spots that we're serving gasoline vehicles will come and install a equipment pad and the chargers and serve folks within that same form factor. But usually it's difficult to adapt that to a new sort of pull-through configuration. But it's something that we're seeing more and more of, that request for trailers. And of course, there are a number of heavy-duty products that are coming out, like pickup trucks, electric pickup trucks. And so we think we're going to see more and more of that in the future. We also think we're going to see more medium and heavy-duty vehicles going electric, delivery trucks and other types of vehicles that don't necessarily fit in a retail parking space. So it's something that we recognize and we're looking very closely at, and I anticipate that some of our future installations will accommodate different types of vehicle configurations.
Hate to play favorites, but there's so many good questions here. Craig Cullen had a question about, where does the power come that is off the grid? Is it solar and wind, or is it something else?
That's another great question. So we are committed to going 100% renewable across our entire network. We are already 100% renewable in some states, but not in all states. We will have an announcement pretty soon, very soon, basically detailing what our next steps are and how we're going to get to 100% renewable nationwide. So please keep an eye out for that. But we are on our way to doing that and making sure that all of the power used on our network is solar and wind power.
Yule Lee had a question, which I suspect a lot of people worry about or think about. What happens if I run out of electricity in the middle of the highway and there's no charging station nearby? And John Lake replied, well, EV tow trucks are coming to Delaware. Good one, John. But the question often arises, what happens if I run out in the middle of the highway? And most of the answers, I think you'd probably say, is don't run out of electricity any more than you would run out of gasoline in the middle of the highway. It's a pain in the neck. So make sure you keep your eye on your fuel gauge and get to a place to get refueled before that happens to you. Any other thoughts on that, Andrew?
No, there's usually a good reserve built in on these vehicles. The manufacturers are not trying to have you stranded. So I've had a few close calls in my own EV, but I have never actually been truly stranded. I've always been able to kind of coast into that charging station and get the charge when I really needed it. And also, I'm driving one of those older electric vehicles that only has an 84-mile range. And so that now that the new generation of electric vehicles averages more like 270 miles of range, it is much less likely that you're going to run out of charge. You have much more leeway to think, you know, man, I'm going to need a charging station and find somewhere to charge up before you head back on your way. So hopefully with more stations, longer range vehicles, and you know, a little bit of attentive drivers, it's not going to be too much of an issue.
I read something recently saying that there are over 100,000 level 2 chargers, not the super fast ones that you're talking about, Andrew. And so if you have an app which directs you to where those are, then you can probably get enough to, in half an hour, say, to get you to another charging station, which has even level 3 fast, super fast DC charging. Phil Gross was asking a question along that same line. What are the laws regarding signage? I know that when I used Electrify America charger on my way home to West Virginia, a 300-mile run, it was a little difficult to find the charger because it doesn't have great big enormous signs like a gas station does. And I was wondering if there's any plans by your Electrify America or state DOTs to put up more signs along the highway showing that if you go off this exit, not only can you get Exxon gasoline, but you also have a place to get EV charging. Is that in the works?
So that's a great question. The signs that you can put on the highway are heavily regulated by a document called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD. And there actually has been sort of a tension back and forth between the states and the federal government over how to sign EV charging on the highways. The federal government at this point in time has actually proposed changes to the manual that would explicitly prohibit putting up signs for EV charging the way that you have for gasoline. There's a category right now that's gasoline or fuel, and technically allows for either gasoline or alternative fuels. The federal signage engineers have actually proposed a change that would remove that sort of flexibility and make it so that only gasoline can be signed that way. And for EV charging, all you would have is a little blue EV charging logo underneath, but it wouldn't tell you what network it is. It wouldn't tell you what level of charging you could expect, and it wouldn't have a lot of the important information that we think would really help customers make a decision about whether it's the right place for them to stop. So we've submitted a number of letters on this. There's a multi-state initiative to push back on the federal government and their signage folks in particular and try to get this fixed. And we're hopeful that in the future that the signage for EVs will be just as straightforward as it is for gasoline vehicles. But unfortunately, there's a regulatory hurdle at the federal level that we're trying to work through right now.
Well, Jill asked a question which might help with that, which is, what about apps? Are they in your car to tell you where the next station is, even if you don't have a sign along the side of the road?
So it depends on the vehicle. Most of the more recent vehicles actually have an app integrated into their vehicle that can tell you where to stop. I drove a Ford Mustang Mach-E that was a work vehicle, and I was amazed at how well they'd integrated it. You put in your destination when you get into the car, and you don't even need to think about where you need to charge. the car calculates the range and calculates how many stops you need, and it will actually just take you off the highway and plop you down right in front of the charging station, and makes it that easy to have it integrated. Some of the older vehicles, like the vehicle I drive, 2015 Nissan Leaf, there's no integration, but there are apps that you can use, just like phone apps. So before you start your trip, you can, calculate where you need to go and use those apps to guide you to your charging station. But I think it's going to get easier in the future as those are integrated into more vehicles.
Do other people want to raise their hand or just jump in and ask their question rather than having me to volunteer you?
Yes, I've got a couple questions. One regarding more the signage at a particular charging spot. Are municipalities allowed to post signage saying these spaces are just for people that are charging? Can that be done?
So it varies by jurisdiction. There are some states that have state laws against blocking EV charging stations. There are county laws, there are local laws. So of course, if your local government passes an ordinance, then they can put up signs notifying people of that ordinance.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, because what caught my attention was the one slide that had it painted at the station on the pavement, which I guess would catch anybody's attention.
Yeah, we've tried a few different iterations of this actually over the years to figure out what works best. And so far, what we have found works best is signs that look kind of like no parking signs. In our first iteration, we did it had the Electrify America logo on it, and it said EV charging only. And people didn't really pay attention to that sign because they're just not used to seeing that. But if you put up a sort of regulatory looking sign with the sort of red text, like you have a no parking sign or something like that, that does seem to be more effective. I think what would be even more effective is if you had a law and actually had law enforcement coming and ticketing people who were blocking the charging stations. But that has proved difficult. There are a lot of sort of stories, even in the states that have passed that type of ordinance, of a low level of understanding that that law exists and it's not consistently enforced, et cetera. One of the other EV charging companies that has a lot of utilization these days, though, has said that their biggest cure for internal combustion engine vehicles blocking their stations has been utilization. They saw a lot of gas vehicles blocking the stations early on when there weren't a lot of electric vehicles parking there and charging. But as the number of EVs charging at these stations has increased, gas drivers have kind of gotten the message and they aren't blocking the stations as much anymore. So it's something we continue to strategize on. Of course, it's extremely frustrating if you show up at an EV charging station and a vehicle that's not even an EV is blocking the station, but we've come up with some good strategies there.
Another question, as far as overstaying your welcome, are there fees that can be built in for, like, your initial charging is at whatever rate you put in there, but say after an hour of being plugged in, you've reached your max for capacity of charging. Is there like a stay too long charge that you guys are able to add in if it's programmed that way?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So we used to have idle fees on our network. And the way that it worked is after the vehicle was completely finished charging, you had a 10-minute grace period to come and move your car, and you'd get a notification on your phone. And after that point, you could be on your way. And what we actually found is that based on the types of installations that we do at places like grocery stores, people aren't hanging out at the grocery store for 4 hours blocking the charger. They're kind of in and out. And if they do have a brief delay in getting back to their car after the vehicle charges, It's really just that our charger was faster than their grocery shopping trip, and they're waiting in line at the checkout, and then they get annoyed at us because they come out and it was only 5 minutes, and you know, they were planning to move. So we actually found that the idle fees were not particularly effective at preventing that, because customers really weren't using our stations that way anyway. These are very rapid charging stations that in 30, 45 minutes usually have somebody completely charged up. And so we find that people vacate the stations pretty quickly. It's something we continue to monitor, and of course we could reinstitute those fees if we have those problems in the future, but based on our technology and use case, people blocking the stations for hours and hours is not really something we encountered.
Charlie, I have a question I'd like to ask.
Go ahead.
Andrew, I'm interested in, at what point in time do you think the combined economic power of electric vehicle manufacturers, companies like your own, and investors in companies like your own, and investors in the electric vehicle manufacturing companies and their suppliers, when will their leverage be such that they can negotiate with the utility companies and say, look, we're a huge source of demand for your services. We want a larger percentage of your generation, or the generation you buy in the regional grid market, to be generated from renewable resources?
That's a very tough question. I think so. The conversations between EV charging providers and utilities are multifaceted, and there's a lot of different angles to them. And a lot of what utilities are looking at right now is ability to integrate renewables into the grid. They're trying, they want to, and they're dealing with the sort of intermittent nature of renewables generation and trying to figure out, through time of use pricing and battery storage, other types of energy storage, how they can integrate those most effectively. So I don't think it's really sort of a leverage that EV charging companies are going to have. I think the renewables integration piece is something that many states are already committed to. They have renewable portfolio standards, and utilities are really dealing with more of a technical problem in terms of how they integrate those into the grid. That said, as I mentioned earlier, we as a company, we are moving to 100% renewable. Regardless of what the utility is doing on average, we are going to have the agreements in place to procure, to generate 100% renewable energy for our charging stations. And so we don't need to wait for the utility for that. We're doing that anyway.
Well, I'll just suggest to you that I think that, as illustrated in the dynamics of politics on energy in Delaware, there are utility companies that resist the more rapid transition to renewable energy.
Thanks, Clem. Yule has a great question, which I think probably some people have a little bit of confusion with, which how about cost retrofit for a charger at my home? I don't think you and Electrify America are selling your fast chargers for home use. Can you straighten her out on that one, Andrew?
So our level of charging is not appropriate for your home. This is a very high capital cost, huge power requirements. We have a lot of issues on the utility side of things, managing costs there. So this is not a home charger. And again, the sort of 3 levels of charging are level 1, level 2, and then DC fast charging. And then within DC fast charging, we are even at the higher echelon of DC fast charging in what we call ultra fast DC fast charging. If you want a charger for your home and a level 1 charger isn't doing it for you, really what you're looking at is a level 2 charger. And there are a lot of states that have incentive programs to help you get one of those. They are much more reasonably priced than a DC fast charger. And all you need is a dryer outlet, a 240 volt circuit in your garage or wherever you want to charge. And that's what you need to get set up with that. So absolutely look into level 2 charging, look and see if your utility or the state offers any initiatives, but that's what you want at your house, not a DC fast charger.
Can you help you understand about how much it costs to put one of those level 2 chargers at our home?
So it's hard because there's a range. I could probably forward along some estimates, but it really depends on whether you have an outlet just sitting there in your garage, in which case it's extremely inexpensive. It's just the cost of the unit. Or if you actually need to do substantial electrical work to run a new circuit from your main panel, or if you need to do any upgrades to your panel to actually add that circuit. So it sort of varies based on your home and how old it is and how it's set up. But probably in the range of $500 to a couple $1,000s, depending on the level of work that's involved. And again, there are a lot of places that do have rebates. I don't know offhand if Delaware does, but those can help to bring the cost down for folks.
Let me throw in something here on this. If you buy a Bolt right now, a 2022 Bolt, one of the incentives that Chevy gives you is having a charger installed in your home for free. And so the offer is either that or some EVgo credits to offset that. So go out and buy a 2022 Bolt.
I have a quick question, Andrew. Is your company working at all with the electrification of school buses since you're doing the super fast charging?
So we have not done school buses yet. We absolutely could in the future. We've done transit buses and shuttles. And we've done the largest investment in sort of port drayage charging in the country, which we're doing right now in Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. So we've done sort of similar applications, but we just haven't done a school bus project quite yet.
There were a couple of questions about level 2 chargers.
Sorry, just to finish up on that, in that same federal infrastructure bill that I mentioned, there's billions of dollars for school bus charging specifically, as well as billions of dollars for transit bus charging. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would make sure you're following the federal infrastructure law. But there will be a lot more opportunity on that in the very near future than there's been funding for in the past.
Thanks.
Sorry, I interrupted there. I was just going to point out that John Irwin and Phil Gross had a good question about what's the cost of the level 2 charger itself. And Eric Youngdale came to the rescue saying $400 to $500 for the charger, but then there's the electrical service to get that electrician to install it for you. Was that about fair, do you think, guys? Thank you.
Well, I would just add, who do you get to do the install and sell you the thing? Are there people who, you buy it from them and they install it, or is it you go buy it from somebody and then you find an electrician?
That's what I did. I found an electrician after I bought the unit that I wanted to buy.
Yeah, you can do it either way. You can buy one of these off the internet and then have an electrician install it, or sometimes there are package deals. If you buy one of these online, they will actually contract with a local electrician to come in and do the work for you, just sort of do it all as a package.
Other than, say, Tesla, would you give the potential company your model and say, will your charger work on my vehicle?
Yeah, 100%. And even Tesla has an adapter. So the plug, it's not a very catchy name, but it's called J1772. And it's a single constant plug for all level 2 charging. And all the vehicles work on that. So a level 2 charger is a level 2 charger, and there's no VHS or beta standards war going on in that area.
Before Eric Youngdale left, he gave us a good message, which is Electrify America has an Electrify Home level 2 charger for your home. Can you tell us about that, Andrew? Is that?
Sure. It's a connected home charger. It's a level 2 charging station. And so if you install it, you can, there are a number of features. You have an app, so you can manage certain aspects of your charging through the Electrify America app. And yeah, it's just a very solid and stylish level 2 charging unit if you want one at home.
What's it cost? And do you know how people get it installed? Do you have a list of electricians you favor?
So I would have to look up the actual cost of it, but there are a couple different ways that you can install it. Either it comes with just a 240 volt plug. So if you, I mean, if you're handy and you already have the dryer plug in your garage, you can mount the thing yourself and just plug it in. Or you can do the hardwired option where if you need any electrical work, you can actually have it hardwired in rather than having the version with a plug. But either way would work.
Other people want to jump in? I see so many good questions there.
I see a couple hands up. I see Janae and Fred. So maybe first Janae.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious, with our markets kind of primed to go electric, are the power grids kind of preparing for this overwhelming amount of electric need that they're going to have in the near future? And what are their efforts to go to that?
So that's a great question. When we actually look at our charging demand right now, we find that people are not charging their vehicles at what's called coincident peak. Basically, they're not charging their vehicles during the same hour in the summer when the grid is most stressed. And maybe it makes sense that when it's 110 degrees out, people don't want to go out and sit in a parking lot and charge their vehicle, and so they do it a little bit later on or something like that. But as we transition more and more of the transportation uses over to electricity, it does start to become a factor. And so there's a lot of exciting things going on with, say, energy storage. We've deployed battery systems at about 200 of our sites, and what they can do is they can reduce our consumption from the grid during those peak hours and make sure that we can help the utility out a little bit during those stress conditions. And then also for fleet charging, if you imagine large fleets of transit buses or delivery vehicles or things like that, in many cases, those vehicles can charge overnight even between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. When really there's not that much electricity use happening at that point in time. So there are ways to manage the stress, but there are going to be incremental upgrades that probably are going to be necessary when we start talking about 100% fleet conversion and some of the targets we have for 2035, 2050.
You want to take another hand from Peter and Amy Robe?
Hi there. I have a question about whether the electric rapid chargers will degrade battery capacity and if there's any stress on the batteries of these cars.
So that's a great question. There was a lot of sort of speculation early on with the early models of electric vehicles that rapid charging was going to really degrade your battery. But at that point in time, we were working with a different set of battery chemistries and all passive cooling. And really, I think what we found since that point in time is that manufacturers have gotten a lot more savvy about protecting the battery, protecting it from extreme temperatures, which can cause degradation, and actually also restricting the battery usable range. So you can actually charge your battery all the way up to 100%. You can't discharge it all the way down to 0%. You're actually operating more in a 10 to 90 or 15 to 85% range. Then with the active cooling on the battery rather than passive cooling, the vehicles can now sense when the battery is starting to get hot, and they can turn on a fan or turn on a coolant pump, and they can bring the temperature of that battery back down. So all these strategies are helping to prevent abnormal wear and tear on the batteries. And any electric vehicle that you buy is going to come with at least an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on your battery pack, during which any sort of issues with that battery are protected. I think we're all still continuing to collect data on this, but I think the main takeaway is that manufacturers have gotten a lot more sophisticated about protecting the batteries, and that the degradation is not as much as was initially thought might be possible in the very first years of EV deployments.
Want to take another hand from Gail and Fred?
Yes, absolutely.
Hey. Okay, so I've actually put a bunch of questions up. First of all, Andrew, this has been exciting, excellent. I'm sure very much appreciated by all of us. And I would like to talk with you offline later. Couple questions along the way. So you talked about a pile of bucks coming from the Fed going to the states. And I'm wondering, first of all, is that distribution
to Delaware based on Delaware population, or is it based on, I'll call it two categories. There's the I-95 corridor, which can be measured at Newark, Maryland, versus all other, which might be Route 1, and then the rest of all other. So that's question one. And if you don't mind, maybe I should just shut up, ask my question, but I have several questions. So I don't
Sure.
want to.
Well, let's do that one quickly, and then we'll give you another one right after that. So
Thank you.
it is a formula funding program, and formula in that title means that there is a formula that the federal government is using. It's
Sure.
not just based on population, it's not just based on land area, and it's not just based on traffic volumes, but it's based on a combination of all of those. The largest pot in the country goes to Texas, and the second largest goes to California. And then it's, as you get down to smaller states with less roadway, the pots get incrementally smaller. But it's based on all those factors combined.
Okay, so we get a bunch of New York to DC traffic, and you're saying that's considered in a serious way so that our Delaware rest stop isn't going to eat all of our money?
It's $18 million in funding that's going to Delaware Department of Transportation, and they will invest it along the nominated alt fuels corridors in the state. And it's not just I-95. And frankly, I-95, the stretch that's through Delaware, already likely meets likely meets the definition of being fully built out under the program. So I would consult the Delaware Department of Transportation website, but they've already put together a sort of priority list of where they would like to see chargers in the state. And it's certainly not going to be $18 million worth of charging infrastructure all on that one tiny stretch of I-95.
I hope not. So as a follow-up suggestion, if Dee or somebody could put out a link to that spot, that would be great. Separately, you live in a competitive world. Do you have a backup slide talking about you and the universe of folks who are competing to fulfill this, their relative size, particularly in the 350 kilowatt market, as an example?
So we really were the pioneers of 350 kilowatt charging.
And Tesla was the pioneer in electric cars.
Yeah, and Tesla was a pioneer in high speed charging too. They did 120 kilowatts when everybody was down, everyone else was down at 50 kilowatts.
How far have they progressed?
Now they have, I think their Gen 3 does 250 kilowatts.
Okay.
But our company has built about 95% of the stations in the country that include 350 kilowatt charging. I don't have a slide on it, but there's a map on the Federal Highway Administration website that shows that.
Okay. Final question. You referred to a bunch of actually political issues obliquely, and I'm wondering, with Ukraine going on, I've been doing daily calls to Carper, Coons, and Blunt Rochester. And I know it doesn't make a difference, but they actually count the calls. I'm also actually at the moment building a list of people and building a communication around, we've got to get rooftops of big box things, having the electric solar capture versus eating up our farmland. And so we in Delaware have actually have a current issue around that thing. So if anybody would like to be part of that distribution, let me know, fredhartman1@gmail.com. But I'm reaching out to our senators, I'm reaching out to our state, I'm reaching out to our county on many levels. I've got pictures of the Costco roofs and the XYZ, the distribution centers up at exit 8 on the Jersey Turnpike. And most roofs don't have anything on them. Costco Hawaii and Costco Berkeley do. and all the others don't. I'm blind copying Costco because I had a conversation with them and shaming them. I'm sorry, promoting with them because I love them, that they get the power on their roofs and put up parking lot shelters that capture the sun. They're doing it at Deltec Wilmington. They're doing it at High Point even. And if you know Jay, that's amazing.
That's a good project, Fred. Keep after all those good people.
Yeah,
Let's
okay.
take a
So
question
I'll
from-
shut up now. But just my question was, if we could be directed toward folk who might be able to enable and promote and make a difference. Because part of the feedback I've gotten is, example, oh my God, if we generated power in our wherevers, that Delmarva wouldn't accept it because of the way the regs are. And so, okay, let's fix the regs.
Well, let's hear a question from you, Lee, and Phil Smith, who want to know, how much do these chargers cost? How many can you build for $18 million?
So our costs are pretty closely guarded. As I mentioned, we've done 95% of the 350 kilowatt charging in the country. So we have a little bit of a secret sauce that we've been perfecting over the years. And so we can't share those costs. But there are publicly available costs on DC fast charging that I could share. Research from the International Council on Clean Transportation. So I'll drop that link in the chat. The only thing that we would say is that we think the 350 kilowatt costs are a little bit high compared to what we actually see today.
Do you see the cost of these chargers coming down over time as we build more and more of them?
Absolutely. I mean, these used to be, these were bespoke products, and they still are in the ultra fast charging space, but you know, we're at the point where we're doing tens of thousands of these instead of hundreds of these. Especially with there are domestic production requirements in the federal infrastructure bill. So there's going to be a lot more domestic production that's going to be stood up. I think we're going to really hit a mass market where we hit some economies of scale here that we're already starting to realize.
Great. You had another good question too, which I love. How about when there's a power outage for a few days, can EVs be charged by a gas power generator? I would point out before you answer, Andrew, that when there's a power outage, gasoline stations can't pump gas because the pumps work on electricity. So the idea is if you see a storm coming, fill up or charge up your EV, and then you'll be in good shape. Andrew, do you want to talk about the gas power generators? Have you ever heard that before?
So we have. I mean, as different states are thinking through how to spend their infrastructure dollars, there are a lot of states, particularly in the Southeast in hurricane country, that are very interested in, well, what happens if we want to install these long evacuation routes? You could do an integrated generator at the site. You could also do a lot of battery storage, but the amount of battery storage it would take to keep one of these stations running for a day, if the grid were completely down, you're talking about $1 million in capital costs. So it would be very expensive. So as Charlie said, you know, when there's a power outage, the gas stations don't work either. But we're thinking very carefully about that, just because it's something that a lot of folks are interested in, particularly as we think about the intersection of climate and resiliency.
One of the factors that people point out is that oftentimes you don't have a whole area that's knocked out of outage, but only a neighborhood or two or five, in which case you could drive across town to your other friend's house and charge up over there at his house, because 90+% of the charging of EVs is done in driveways of people's homes, not at one of Andrew's wonderful Electrify America super fast chargers.
Charlie, can I follow up on that? It sounds like, you know, if I'm fortunate enough to be, you know, within a couple of miles of one of these fast chargers, that kind of negates the need for me to have one in my house.
It'll probably be cheaper if you charge up at your home than if you charge up at Electrify America. Per kilowatt. Is that right, Andrew?
That's true. I mean, and it's an equity issue. We're working to bring down that cost differential. We don't want folks who can't charge at home because they live in a multi-unit dwelling to not have the same cost savings as somebody who can charge at home. But yeah, as of now, the cost to charge at a public DC fast charging station is significantly higher than it is to charge at home, though we always set our prices to be less than the equivalent cost of gasoline. So relative to filling up at the pump with gasoline, you will save money by charging with Electrify America.
So is there a way, what is the cost of filling up my, I don't have an electric car, charging up my electric car for how many kilowatts?
So the price per kilowatt, we have two pricing levels. If you can be a member with us and get 31 cents a kilowatt hour, or you can pay sort of the rack rate, which is 43 cents a kilowatt hour. And 43 cents a kilowatt hour comes out to $2 and change per gallon. So, you know, these days, especially, it's a pretty good deal. But we always want folks to save some money by charging with us relative to driving a gasoline car.
Cool.
And the cost of electricity here in Delaware is around about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's 1/3 of the cost of gasoline to drive your electric car if you're charging at home, or as Andrew says, equivalent with one of the super fast chargers.
Yeah, unfortunately, we pay significantly more per kilowatt hour than you would at your home, because in Delaware, we also face demand charges of about $10 per kilowatt. And so a single driver coming and using one of our stations can generate thousands to tens of thousands of dollars in utility bills for us that month. So it's something we're continuing to work on and balance, but it's much less expensive to buy power at home than it is for us to buy power at one of our stations.
So Peter and Amy, though, we're still questioning the 31 cents and the 43 cents. That's what you would pay, what you would charge to people like us who are using your Electrify America station. Still cheaper than gas, though, at those prices. Is that right?
That's right.
And you're saying that the 43 cents is equivalent to $2 worth of gas. Is that what I understood?
It's somewhere between 2 and 3. I would have to do the math really quickly to figure it out, but I'll do that in a second.
Okay, no, that's good. Richard, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. I would like to buy an electric vehicle. I have a hybrid, but would really love to have a Tesla. There's a long wait to get them now. The prices are going up. There's no rebate, I guess, no federal rebate on Teslas anymore. I think some of the other ones might have some federal rebate. But what my question is does the federal government plan to have more rebates? Is there any incentive, any reason to wait, since it's a long wait to get one of these cars anyway?
So the extension of the federal rebate was one of the issues that was part of the Build Back Better negotiations. And of course, that still has not progressed. So I think that it's something that's always been on the table for potential inclusion in that bill. But unfortunately, the way that the rebate was structured was that the first 200,000 vehicles of every manufacturer qualified for this rebate, and then it starts phasing out quarter after quarter. And it was not the best way to structure that, because it punished the early movers. It punished the companies that sold a lot of electric vehicles early, and now their vehicles are more expensive. So I would continue to follow the federal negotiations around Build Back Better, and who knows what'll happen, but without a change to the tax code, that rebate can't just be created again by some federal agency. It would need to be extended by Congress.
I was in Philadelphia yesterday, and I wish I could share the pictures, but there were at least throughout our walking path 20 to 25 small curbside charging stations in residential areas. And needless to say, being familiar in the electric and lighting industry, they were put out by Leviton. But they were nice. They were low and looked almost like the old air pump things that you would see at a gas station 100 years ago. So they weren't that intrusive, didn't really detract from the neighborhood, but I don't know what level of charging they would be.
Yeah, those would be level 2 chargers, and there's lots of sort of intriguing ideas about how to get more of those, particularly in right-of-way charging. There have been a lot of barriers to charging actually in the roadway or at the curbside, but it's something that people continue to work on. And to be honest, we need all of these types of technologies. There's no single solution, and you'll have multi-unit dwellings where it's really hard to get charging in there, and you'll have other areas where you have very little real estate to actually build a public DC fast charging station. So yeah, there's a wide range of technologies that folks are working on, and they're all part of the solution here.
Would those individual homeowners that put them up, would they derive a revenue from other neighbors or other people pulling up and plugging in?
I would assume those are not put up by individual homeowners. When we looked at this in city of Portland, there was really no way that you could do that in the public right of way. So there have been utility pilots to install right of way charging. There have been some sort of municipal pilots, especially where the municipality owns their utility, to do right of way charging. But I very much doubt that it would be the private homeowner who would be able to install at that location. It becomes an issue that you can't reserve a spot on public lands, and you can't charge for a service on public land without having some kind of arrangement there. So there really is no real way to get that, all the logistics to work out for a private homeowner.
Jenny had another long question. Do you see that in the chat area? Andrew, can you address her?
Sure. Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it's not really just that the EV cars are marked up due to market demand so much as that all cars are marked up due to market demand right now. We're going through this incredible semiconductor shortage. We're going through this, incredible period of spending and demand for new vehicles. Everybody is very much hoping that this stabilizes into the future. And I won't go into sort of specific manufacturer strategies, but there's actually been a lot of press recently about manufacturers putting pressure on their dealers not to have markups on EVs or require a major over MSRP commitment in order to reserve one of the limited stock of vehicles that are coming out. It's been a crazy couple of years for the world, the pandemic and the semiconductor shortage. We are certainly hoping that everything will stabilize in the future and we can get these vehicles into the hands of everybody who wants them.
Hey, Andrew, to add on top of that, do you think it's worth it to wait to purchase a vehicle like this until the market's kind of stabilized? I mean,
I don't think I can weigh in on sort of individual sort of purchasing recommendations. I would just say that all the auto companies are working to stabilize this. There are some barriers in place, but everyone wants that everybody who wants to drive an electric vehicle is able to do that. And also just from a technology perspective, the technology gets better year after year. So that's all I can say on that.
that's fair. Thank you.
And on that note, because Delaware is not a ZEV state, you really have to go out of state to buy an electric vehicle. And Carney has just passed it that Delaware is a ZEV state. So I believe it doesn't take effect for another year or so because the dealers have to, get online to get the newer or get the electric cars. So that would be another consideration to be able to buy in state, waiting for those ZEV regulations to come into play.
Yes, be sure to thank
2026, John Irwin says.
Be sure to thank our governor for having put forward the ZEV, zero emission vehicle program like they have in California. That's going to help our state a lot. Back to Janae's question, though, that she had about whether she should buy a car now or later. Buy an electric car now. We need to have everybody buying as many electric cars as we can to help stop global warming. So that's my opinion on the topic. Anybody?
And I want to address Judy's question. It looks like she sent it by a direct message, but basically saying she's concerned that the northern part of the state is going to get all the chargers. So I want to emphasize that the intent of this program, the whole structure of this program is based on highway corridor charging. And a state is not fully built out if its entire length of that corridor doesn't have a very powerful large format charging station every 50 miles. So I don't think that it's realistic that all the chargers would get clustered in one area, because it wouldn't be approved by the federal government. You have to show that your plan is installing corridor charging. Michael Smith is absolutely correct that that 113 and I-95 are the nominated corridors in Delaware right now. I think, yeah, that's it at this point in time. So that's the sort of wish list in the near term that Delaware has put out there for where they're looking to install charging. And of course, it could grow from there in the future. If all those get covered at least every 50 miles with a very powerful charging station, Delaware can nominate additional corridors, or they can actually just sort of roll these funds over into any other sort of programs of their choosing. And once all those corridors are fully built out and meet that definition.
Peggy, do you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I was just going to make a little comment that I discovered today that I am able to charge an electric vehicle. So I got on the phone to try to find one, and I probably called 6 places and I could not find one. I can't find a car, an electric vehicle. If anyone knows where you can buy one, I can't get into the Tesla range, but you know, kind of a common person's price range. And I couldn't find one today.
I'd be glad to help you with that, Peggy. This is Charlie.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you.
Charlie has the inside scoop. Andrew, I don't want to overstay our welcome with you. I don't know if we have any more questions.
Well, we've got lots of interesting questions and things. I have a feeling we could go on for quite a while. Maybe Andrew would like to have some closing or concluding comments.
I'd be happy to take a couple more questions if folks have just maybe 1 or 2 more to ask, and then maybe we could wrap it up.
Actually, Charlie, you're a wonderful moderator. Maybe you could pick a couple.
Well, that's very kind of you. I was just going to remark that Dean Day had an interesting observation about Royal Farms has DCFC, that's direct current fast charging, with a $3.50 connection fee and 29 cents per kilowatt. Is that, or 29 cents per kilowatt hour probably, is that something that Electrify America is thinking is a reasonable way to charge people, or are you exploring in that area?
So we don't charge a connection fee. The way that it's called Pass Plus, I mentioned we had a membership. So with us, you would pay $4 a month, just a one-time fee, and then you would have access to 31 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you were charging several times over the course of a month, probably ours would be a little bit less expensive since you'd only pay that $4 once, whereas if you were going to Royal Farms, you would pay $3.50 every single time that you charged. But there are a lot of different business models in this space. And I mean, that one also sounds like it's probably less than the cost of gasoline as long as you're dispensing enough kilowatt hours. But yeah, range of models there.
Andrew, did you say $4 an initial one-time fee or a monthly membership fee?
So for us, it's $4 a month to become a member with us. And what you get in exchange is you get a discount from 43 to 31 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you do the math on that, you know, if you are going to charge more than 30 kilowatt hours at our stations over the course of a month, it's worth becoming a member, and you're going to pay less overall and get access to those lower charging rates.
Michael Smith, did you have another question or a question?
Yes, I did. I had a slightly wonky question that I've been interested in recently. So I know the federal government has like not a requirement per se, but like an interest in getting them within fast charging stations within 1 mile of these corridors. Do you happen to know, is that 1 mile as the crow flies or 1 mile driving, or what kind of situation we talking about? Because that, you know, there's a lot of Wawas that are like 1.2 miles away.
Yeah, it's a great question. And like, I mean, we and all the DOTs have had our GIS folks like asking us exactly these same questions. So it's fantastic. It's one of the first things that everybody in this space kind of honed in on. It is 1 mile driving distance from the property to the highway on-ramp. You don't actually need to get all the way onto the highway, but it's also not as the crow flies. We do think that there's going to be a little bit, we very much hope there's going to be a little bit of flexibility on that though, because there are a lot of stations when we look at the 800 stations we've built around the country that are 1.08 miles off of the highway, even using that reckoning. And is it really the best use of limited federal funds to build another identical station 0.08 miles closer to the highway interchange? So we hope there's going to be a little bit of flexibility on that.
Yuli's still interested in not breaking down by the side of the road with her question.
Yeah, no, there are tow trucks that include a 50 kilowatt DC fast charger. They can come out, basically they're driving a big battery around and they can charge you up. Of course, the hope is that that doesn't happen to you, but if you call AAA, they can help you out.
I once saw a Tesla stuck by the side of the road and he was calling a tow truck to have him towed to the next charging station. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if I were able to share some of the extra power I had in my electric vehicle with him to help him get to the next station without having to pay for the tow truck? Is anything like that happening in the future?
I've seen a YouTube video where somebody actually did that. They towed it with an electric vehicle and it got something like 10 miles of charge in, I don't know, it wasn't actually that far. It was a Tesla, and then he drove it to the station.
Yeah, I mean, you could tow the vehicle that's dead and use the regenerative braking to charge it up enough that you could get to your next destination. I think in terms of offboarding power, there are some EVs that come with a 110 volt outlet. I don't know if they support the 12 amp charging you would need to actually plug in another EV and run that cord. It's beyond my ken. We're just focused on the charging stations themselves.
Actually, Andrew, that's funny you should mention that. There are a couple of like pickups that have connections like that, that have just a real limited amount where you can at least give them enough of a charge to go a few miles.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the Ford pickup truck, the Lightning, the E-Lightning, has a way of delivering power exterior to the vehicle, so you could run a power saw or whatever at your construction site. And I think it's not only level 1, that's 110 volt outlets like your wall socket, but also the 240 voltage, so you could run a welder or something like that at the construction site.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, you had said something about energy storage. I mean, there's been some conversation that, you know, with the intermittency of say, wind energy, is there a way to store energy in people's cars and have that be like a variety of little batteries storing energy?
Sure, that's a great question. So people talk about this all the time with vehicle to grid, and there's sort of a couple different levels. There's what people call V1G and then V2G, where V2G is like true bidirectional charging, where power flows into the vehicles or back from the vehicles onto the grid. And V1G is more of a simpler application where basically you can turn on or off or slow down the charging of the vehicles depending on grid conditions. And that application is fairly advanced. There are a lot of utilities that now offer time of use rates for your entire house. And most of the electric vehicles actually come with a timer that's built in so that you can have your vehicle set to start charging at midnight, and you can actually take advantage of the time of use rate. The bidirectional charging, actually taking power back off of the vehicle and putting it into the grid, that is much more complicated. There have been a lot of different tests and research projects on that. you get into the number of cycles in the battery and the warranty of the battery. And so the manufacturers haven't really liked it in the past. But it is something that companies are increasingly looking at and continue to pursue. And I do think we'll eventually get there. I would say that for DC fast charging, it's not that great. So our stations are basically designed so you plug in, you get your charge as quickly as possible. And if you have a vehicle that's sitting there all night, you can make those decisions. Well, okay, I'm not going to charge it from 7 p.m. until midnight. And then I'm going to start charging it at midnight and charge it until 6 a.m. You have this really long time window when you can play with your energy demands and move it around. But with our types of stations, if you've pulled off the highway, you're trying to charge, you're trying to get back on the highway, there's no real way that we can integrate that into our platform. Because you're looking to charge quickly and get back on the highway and not wait there for half an hour because we want to turn down the rate of charging to do something with the utility. So the way that we do energy storage is we deploy a stationary battery, a giant battery that just sits at the site. And that helps us to determine whether we pull energy from the battery or from the grid, depending on what the conditions on the grid look like and how many vehicles are plugged in at our station.
So going back to that picture, you had the things that look like gas pumps, and then behind that, there were kind of large blocks of things, and they're the batteries.
That's exactly right. There's a few things back there. There's a utility transformer, and then there's power cabinets and switchgear, and then there's battery storage, but it's one of the things that's back there on that equipment pad.
Thank you.
Sure.
One basic question from Leslie: how often do you replace a battery? That's not necessarily your expertise, but you got a quick answer for her?
In an electric, like the traction battery in an electric vehicle?
I guess that's what her question is.
So I mentioned earlier, they come with an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty at least. My car is 7 years old and I still have all my bars, as they say. I haven't lost any capacity in my battery. So I think there was one article about how everybody was going to need to replace their EV battery back in like 2015. And I think everybody under the sun read it. I have not really heard of that being something that happens commonly, at least within the first decade of a vehicle's life. I know that there are exceptions to that. I've read about some exceptions to that, but I've had 2 electric vehicles and it has not been a problem in either one of those. And again, the manufacturer has an 8-year warranty on that battery, so it's not something that you consider, at least early on.
Do you know about some of the early batteries that Tesla had, and how long have they lasted already?
So the Tesla batteries, I saw some research on this several years ago at this point, but it was out of Idaho National Laboratory, and they were showing that even after 120,000 miles, most Tesla batteries were keeping about 90% of their charge. Some of them were down around 85%. But it is very specific. You have one bad cell in your battery, and that can affect the entire battery. So I know that there have been examples of batteries that had much worse life than that. I think most of the sort of bad news around batteries was related to first generation Nissan Leafs, particularly in markets like San Diego and Phoenix, Arizona. Again, those batteries were all passively cooled. They had no active cooling system. And so they would sit in parking lots on the asphalt and they would just bake. And batteries they're chemical cells, and chemical reactions are all temperature dependent. And so if you put them in those types of conditions, you can really do serious damage to the cells. And so you did have in those markets some batteries that very quickly lost their capacity. But again, manufacturers are getting more sophisticated about how to protect their batteries into the future, and the battery chemistries are getting better as well. So I think it's just incrementally getting better with every generation. Just like the battery life on your cell phone is much better than the battery life on your cell phone was 5 years ago, and hopefully it'll just continue on that trend.
Jill, do you want to pull down the curtain on this wonderful show, the great time that we've had?
No, I want to keep right on going. This is absolutely wonderful. Andrew, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank